So without further ado, today's guest on Real Rover is Christopher J. Earnshaw, who is a 33-degree Scottish Rite Freemason. And to give you a little bit of his background from the back of his book, which I have read, will become the basis of our talk today, Freemasonry, Spiritual Alchemy. Chris is a past Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of Japan. He's a past master of the Research Lodge, also of the Grand Lodge of Japan. As previously mentioned, he is Scottish Rite, 33 degrees, IGH. Now, what does IGH mean?
Inspector General Honorary.
Okay.
So in Freemasonry, the top three ranks, 32nd, 33rd, and the higher 33rd, are all given as honorary degrees.
I see. So you have
work well done.
You've received this as an honorary degree then?
Yes, it's like a acknowledgement of working hard, promoting Freemasonry and things like that.
Excellent. You're also the recipient of the Order of Merit from the Grand Lodge of Japan for educational activities. You're a past master of the Sinim Lodge, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and you are a PhD in neuroscience, as well as being the CEO.
Oliver Sacks.
Also the CEO of a medical device manufacturer living in Tokyo, Japan. That's just part of the story.
Yes.
It's a good place to start.
Right.
So welcome to Real Rover, Chris. It's a great honor and a privilege to have you as my interviewee today. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Good to see you.
And you're surrounded by, you've just told me you have another 4 walls full of books.
It goes round and round. It's all over. My wife complains. She thinks the floor will give way in the house, you know. But what can you do?
Just give us an idea of what's behind you to alert people to the different genres that you're researching. What's behind you?
So my personal interests are looking just at those. So I have one side which is mainly to do with China and to do with Freemasonry. And then these are all spiritual books. We got the ordinary spiritual books like Esther Hicks or Wayne Dyer, but also some fairly heavyweight ones like Manly P. Hall, Doreen Virtue, just everything. All sorts of things. And on the other side, mainly to do with religion, philosophy, Egypt, tons of books on Egypt, and also some business books as well. Yeah.
Well, that should alert our viewers right away to the breadth and depth and the width of your scholarly research so far, because, you know, for many people, the word Freemason just immediately brings up so many strange misconceptions, misunderstandings, and you often want to ask these individuals, have you ever actually studied the history of Freemasonry, or more importantly, the ideals of Freemasonry? So in today's talk, I want to go through some of the things that you've brought up in this book here. It's not the only book you've written. You've written both in Japanese and English. Is that correct?
Yes, I wrote a kind of high-level book in Japanese, which is, excuse me, I think this one. Yes. That one, I don't know if you can see it.
Freemason, Shinjitsu no Rekishi, the truth of Freemasonry.
And being Japanese, it opens on the wrong side, but that's okay. This is published by Gakken, which is a large Japanese scholastic publisher, mainly for schools and academics.
Yes, I'm familiar with them. And can you tell me how you write in Japanese? Do you type in Japanese? Do you use any interpretation? Or
So I read into my mobile phone that has a voice to text in Japanese So
Oh,
I say it in Japanese directly. It types it all out. I send it to a friend, and he checks it for me.
excellent way to do it. I'll have to consider that possibility.
Yeah, it's
Really?
very fast. So I look at the English, and I just in my head. Normally, I check the meaning of the words. Say, for example, like a difficult word, I would check the Japanese in advance so I can read it fluently without having to stop and look in dictionaries and things.
So you must be one of, if not the only, Freemason who is doing that kind of work bilingually. Would that be correct?
There are very few books written in Japanese about Freemasonry. And there's the second point that Freemasons are not allowed to publish without the Grand Master's permission. And so in my book, I reference that because it's a major point. People will say, oh, but you can't write these secrets. And I say, well, I have permission from the Grand Master.
I noticed that at the end of the book here, you have got that written permission.
Yes.
It's a little bit like the Catholic Church in that sense. If you want to write anything as a priest or a monk, you have to have the seal of approval.
Oh, there's a picture of the letter. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Just
there
about
it is.
there. Yeah. And also in the beginning, there's a statement called the sanction from the Grand Master.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, the sanction. This book has been sanctioned.
Yeah.
So,
but many people don't, and that's a big issue for us because then we can't check the quality and the veracity of the issue, what he's writing.
Exactly. There are a lot of people out there writing about Freemasonry from points of view that are not necessarily founded in what's actually going on. So it's refreshing to be able to interview somebody who actually knows what he's talking about and has written it in 2 languages, so both in the East and the West can get it. Yep. So first of all, let's tell our individual viewers where you are and why you are in Tokyo and how you got there.
Yes, it's a mystery to me as well. My father was an airline pilot, and when I was young, I'm talking about the early 60s, I flew fairly extensively with him around the world because family of pilots fly free. This is British Airways. At the time, it was BOAC. Now it's British Airways. And he was very interested in the Orient. And so it got me thinking about the Orient. I went to high school in London, well, first in Sussex and then later in London, at the time of the oil shock of 72 and 74. And at the time I was studying A-level economics. And it seemed to me that, we were having a lot of kind of Japan bashing. People were attacking cars and breaking the screens and puncturing the tires of Japanese cars. They felt that Japan was dumping the cars in Europe at a very low price to get market share. And it seemed to me that the newspapers were one-sided, just talking about the English perception of the problem. And I thought, well, there's got to be 2 sides to the story. Perhaps I should study Japanese and then learn a little bit more about Japan. So I bought a lingophone Japanese course. And the salesman said in the 10 years he'd been there, he'd only sold 1 lingophone Japanese course. So Japanese wasn't very popular compared to lingophone Spanish and French, of course. So anyway, I did the course, and I came to Japan initially for 1 year, and I just didn't go back.
What year was that when you arrived?
74.
That's exactly the same year I arrived too. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So you've been here in Japan since then, basically.
Yes, I did go back to England for about 3 years to work for an English pharmaceutical company, and then they sent me back out to Japan.
I see. So tell me about your training, not your Freemasonry training, your professional training, your professional background.
So I don't really think of O levels as so important, but I did 10 O levels and passed them, and I got 4 A levels, and then I was wondering what to do at university, and my A level passes weren't so strong. I was getting D's, like 3 D's and a C or something. Yes, so this is really important when you go to university. So I was partly thinking about going to Cambridge to do Japanese.
I see.
And at the time, only 4 universities taught Japanese in England: Oxford and Cambridge, Sheffield and London. And they didn't have many students. The faculty was something like 1 or 2 professors and 3 lecturers and 8 or 10 students. So it was more like particularly at Oxford and Cambridge, where they teach often in the professor's house, in his having a cup of tea and coffee. It's not a big blackboard auditorium style teaching in Oxford and Cambridge, and that appealed to me. So I was thinking about doing it, and that's why I came to Japan, hopefully to learn Japanese and then to be 1 year ahead of everybody at university.
I see.
Yeah.
And tell me about your PhD. What was your thesis about?
So it's a little bit complicated because my background isn't science. I did economics. What did I do? Economics, the history of art, English, and Spanish for A levels. So languages, basically. And then to do science is not so easy. They don't really think you have the background to do it. So when I was in the last, 30, 40 years, I studied at the US Naval Base at Yokosuka to do emergency medicine.
I see.
And so that's an elective course, so you don't have to have a background in medicine. I'd studied simple medicine as a medical representative for the pharmaceutical company, the Wellcome Foundation. They offered me a job, and they said, it was interesting, the interview said, it's easier for us to teach you medicine than it is to teach you Japanese. So they wanted somebody who had a strong grounding in Japanese, and that's why I got the job. So then they taught me medicine, and I did all those courses, anatomy and whatever. So that was my background in medicine. It wasn't very strong, I did a master's in transpersonal psychology at Atlantic University. And with that master's, then I applied to do neuroscience. And it's only because being in the pharmaceutical industry, I knew so many people working at hospitals in the area.
You have basically received a very unusual education in both English and Japanese. You've spent most of your life here. So now let's go into your first glimmerings of an interest in Freemasonry. When, how?
Basically, my family were Freemasons. My father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and they never talked to me about it much, but I knew they were. And my grandma was very proud that my grandfather's, so she talked about it, but she didn't really know much about it. I think I wrote about it in one of my books. I think the first interesting experience I had was when the Speaker of the House of Commons came to visit my grandfather one night. He was staying with us because he was feeling poorly. And I opened the door and I knew, he said, I've come to see your grandfather. And I said, I know you from somewhere. I'd seen him on television, but I couldn't remember his name, And he said, I'm whatever it is. And then while he was talking with my grandfather, my grandmother said, oh yeah, he's the Speaker, Why did he come to see my grandfather? It was really kind of strange, because he's a kind of eminent person. And I think that was the first, that somebody would take the time to come all the way to see my grandfather was really, it was a really important first step for me.
So at that point, you were how old?
16 perhaps.
Okay, so you didn't really have much of an inkling of what was going on until this impressive figure appeared at your door, and you had to wonder, why is he here? There must be something behind all of this. And did that propel you into a little bit of study about Freemasonry? How did it take on from there?
So I lived in what was it? Just off Warren Street. I think it was Good Street, Warren Street, off Tottenham Court Road in London. My mother worked in University College, and she got an apartment inside the university, so we were living there. So I could walk down the road to Foyle's bookshop, and I looked up Freemasonry books, and most of them were extremely boring, and it was just really not interesting reading at all, so I didn't buy anything. And then when I came to Japan, I was working in Kobe, and I was a member of the Kobe Club, which is in Sannomiya. Are you familiar? Oh, you live there, of course. Yeah. So it's in Kitanacho. Yeah? Do you know the Kobe Club? Anyway, at the back of the Kobe Club, there's a Masonic lodge. Did you know?
I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. If you go into the car park and go to the back, there's a building specially built. It's called Kirby Hall.
Ah.
And that was one of the ex-members of the Kobe Club donated money to build the lodge there.
I see.
And then when I saw that, and then I found out that my boss at Welcome in Kobe was a Mason, I asked him, could I apply? And that's how I got in.
I see.
And that was 1984. I think actually I applied in 82, and I became a Master Mason in 84.
So was that relatively fast in terms of progressing through the ranks?
Actually quite slow, because he said there were political issues, so I had to wait a little. I made an application, I had to wait a little. Lodges go through phases, and it's all to do with personalities, you have a strong personality in the lodge, they sometimes dominate the lodge. Particularly if they're the master of the lodge. So it depends. Things change.
So for people who know absolutely nothing about Freemasonry, how would you characterize what a lodge does?
Okay, so I mentioned in my book, and I don't remember verbatim, but it's a mixture of a debating society and also a theater group, and also a welfare society, and also an esoteric society that uses ritual and mainly ritual based on a religious basis to teach moral teachings.
That's a very interesting way to...
If I read it, it'll be better. But
that's very interesting. No, the mix of theater and debating and a moral society and a place that does something to actually help other people is what, for example, partly would have been done by the church in the old days. But now there's a separation between, of course, church and state, so you don't get all of that in one place. It's like the left brain stuff is for the left brain institutions, and the right brains are for the artists and the emotional types. But it seems that you have a good mix there. So what kind of debates?
So it depends again on the master, because he sets the schedule for the year normally. And so if they have a certain topic, normally it's to do with Freemasonry. And so I wrote this book, this one here, is based, it's only part one of four books.
Oh, I see.
And they're all based on the lectures that I gave as the Master of the Research Society.
Oh, I see. Well, just to give people a taste of the contents of this book, which I think is an excellent introduction to Freemasonry. You talk about the Templars and the Reconquista, the Enlightenment, from Bacon and Flood to Newton and Leibniz. Now, a lot of people will know these names. They've heard of Francis Bacon. They've heard of Roger Bacon. They've certainly heard of Isaac Newton.
Right.
But many people will not be aware of the connections between these leaders, literally,
Right.
of what later became our scientific establishment.
Right.
Newton in particular. I mean, we still use Newtonian physics, but it's not well known that he was a great student of the Bible, or that he had anything to do with Freemasonry. Is it common knowledge that he had connections with the Masons?
He isn't a Freemason, but two people he worked closely with, who are friends of his, were the first Freemasons, the first Grand Masters. And because society was so small in those days, everybody would have known that. So in the Royal Society, Newton's secretary, his name is John de Sagulier, he was the third Grand Master of Freemasons.
I see. So by implication, he was definitely connected.
But also, Newton was a very, I sometimes forget my English, but he was a very dedicated alchemist. And recently, documents have been found that he probably spent 30% of his time studying alchemy.
Indeed. So this is an opportune moment to get to the subtitle of your book, which is Spiritual Alchemy. Again, something quite arcane, but what is your understanding of alchemy? So
originally in alchemy started in about 500 AD in China, and it was part of a national project to find an elixir for immortality for the emperor. So the emperor, particularly Qin He Hua Ti Ding, I think it is, he's the first emperor of China. He joined all the different factions and countries together to form the China. And so that's nearly 2,000 years ago. And from that time onwards, people have been looking to try and find a way to become immortal. It's partly to do with Taoism and Tao studies. And so about 500 AD, the emperor set up an alchemical laboratory. And they used things like gold and add mercury and cinnabar. Mercury comes from cinnabar. It's a stone, but you can extract this liquid metal from the stone. And because they had such special qualities, like it's a liquid metal, you know, that alone is really unusual. It doesn't solidify. Gold never tarnishes. It's the only metal that doesn't tarnish. And so these were thought to have special qualities, and they were used to make special concoctions to hopefully give the emperor lasting life. Unfortunately, most of the emperors that drank this, they died of mercury poisoning.
Not a good ad for alchemy.
Right. So then but the emperor insisted, you know, if he insists, I want this elixir. But the alchemists themselves realized it didn't work. And they realized the real alchemy was a spiritual alchemy, internal alchemy. And it's where we get the idea of Qigong, in Japan, Kiko, and this energy, and using the energy. And many of the Taoists then were able to use an internal alchemy where they could change their bodies and become more spiritually attuned to the world. And that's what they called spiritual alchemy.
So the alchemical tradition goes back a very long time. It was initially designed, let's say, for this extremely lofty goal of attaining immortality, but it was later understood that this immortality was not something that could be achieved through physical means.
Yes.
And so the medieval alchemists used the symbolism of what we now call chemistry, to hint at the fact that something else was going on. But this brings us to the whole idea of occult or hidden, not obvious to people, levels of information, which of course Freemasonry is world famous for and often misunderstood regarding. So could you go into the idea of how information was communicated through the lodge system, through the gradation system, the levels in Freemasonry?
If I could go back one step and then unpack your question, the information about alchemy came from China, mainly through the Arabs and the Silk Road. And so the Arabs were trading with India and as far, even further to places like the Philippines and Indonesia and places like that. And they met the Chinese and they brought the information. But there were two streams of alchemical thought. One was that you could actually make gold from a combination of magnesium, mercury, and sulfur, magnesium, and mercury. But magnesium is very unstable and a lot of people died. So after about 100 years, they changed that into salt. So it became salt, sulfur, and mercury. And then by adding some sort of special secret ingredient, then you would be able to make gold out of that. And unfortunately, this is what whole of Europe and England got charmed with. They thought they could make gold. And there was a second stream which the people, the spiritual alchemists realized it was an internal teaching. And then this somehow got into some of the monastic orders in Europe, who saw this as a way of explaining the teachings of Christ, that something had to be killed and then resurrected for it to become godlike. And so in alchemy, you have to kill the salt and then have to resurrect it. And then you can join the three. It's really complicated. And so everything was written in codes, and particularly to do with birds. Different colored birds represented different, like the pelican, sorry, the pelican or the phoenix was used as the rubedos stage, which is the last stage of alchemy. You know, when you've been successful, you will see red in your mortise when you're making it. But you'll start off with a raven because it's black, and then it'll go to swan, which is white, you know, all these different colors. And so this became the beginning of the occult idea that it was hidden teaching in codes and rewriting things sometimes backwards or forwards, and so everything became hidden. So therefore, people really didn't understand what they were doing. They were just copying and they were guessing, and there were a lot of charlatans selling ideas. And so, you know, by the time it came to England in about 1640, people had forgotten about alchemy. It was just out of favor. But Robert Boyle and Newton and a few others, about a handful of others, continued the search right up to the 1720s probably. And so Freemasonry starts in 1716, but it's when we say it starts, it's actually what I believe is that current Freemasonry took the ideas of a stonemasons fraternity. So Freemasons, it's a whole bag of worms, this is. From about the 1300s, even earlier, 1100s, there was a boom in building cathedrals in Europe. There was a whole kind of monastic craze. And it seems that the Templars, who are extremely rich because they'd been very successful in trading with the Far East, they had their own fleet of ships, and they had their own banking system, and they made a lot of money, that they were acting as money brokers to the Vatican and other religious orders who want to set up cathedrals. A cathedral can take anything from 10, 20, even 100 years to build. So this was a long-term project. And the people who were building it, of course, were stonemasons. But they didn't have a very good education. There was, most of them couldn't read or write, but they knew how to cut stones. Most of them had to have a 7-year apprentice, because that was the law in England at the time. Up until about 1700, all the craftsmen had to have a 7-year apprentice, which is basically 7 years when they didn't get paid and they were taken advantage of by their masters. But that's how they learned. And so we have a degree in Freemasonry called the Mark Masters. And it's where you make a mark, symbolic mark on a stone. And the reason that's done is because that's how the Masons identified who made the stone, because they couldn't put a name, they just put a mark. And it'd be an X or 2 P's backward, or whatever they could do, you know, to make a symbol to identify. Circle with a cross, you know. So, but they had this fraternity that had kind of stumbled on. It hadn't been given the status of a guild because they didn't receive a warrant from the king. The first guild hall wasn't built until about 1617, after the Great Fire of London. So when they had a guild hall, then they were a guild. But before that, it was just it was a fraternity. And that's why many people confuse the fraternity of modern Freemasons with what the old stonemasons were. Just they used the name fraternity.
So that's
to do with
that's the operative versus the speculative Freemasons,
yes.
right? I see. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, so the speculative is when we come in time of the Enlightenment, where the way I see it is that the first 3 Grand Masters was Anthony Sayer, was the first Grand Master. He was an operative Mason, but he changed to become a speculative Mason. And then George Payne and John de Sagulier. What's interesting, these people are educated people. You know, de Sagulier was twice a priest. He was a Huguenot priest from France. When he came to England, he joined the Church of England as a priest. When he went to Oxford, in those days, if you went to Oxford to study, you had to join the priesthood. That's just the law. And also the dons also had to be priests. And Isaac Newton was the professor of mathematics at Oxford, and he refused to become a priest because he was an Arianist, I suppose. Yes, he didn't believe in the Trinity, and the Trinity is really important. Really important. We don't think much of it now, but it's all to do with the spiritual energy. That there are 3 bodies inside us, and these 3 bodies have to be joined and communicate before you come full and take on some sort of godlike properties.
What do you refer to those 3 bodies as?
Well, that's so. In the church, they call it God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. The Chinese refer to it as the Tandian, which is the lower energy center, which has to join to your heart, which joins to your head, where you're already connected with God, but the connection has been severed. And once you can join the first 2 bodies, then they naturally join the 3rd body, and then all 3 elected. So at that time, you are in total communication with God at any time. It's not just God with a capital G, it's more an intelligent universe is how I would put it.
So these ideas of spiritual alchemy, what you've just described to me is usually the purview of religion. So there is a lot of discord historically between the church and Freemasonry. Can you go into that a little bit? Why?
Yes, just see if I can reach back to get one of my books here. Where is it? Then I give you quotation. Where's it gone? It was here. Here it is. No, this is an earlier book I wrote called The Tarot of the Revelation. It's based on the revelation of Sir John the Divine. And if I probably find it, it talks about the Sadducees and the Pharisees in the time of Jesus. Whether he existed or not is another question, but they forbade these occult teachings, and they used a very good phrase, and I'm actually, when I look at it now, I probably won't be able to find it, but they said that, I think it comes from Luke, the book of Luke, and he said that you have forbidden people to enter in, and you've thrown away the key so that other people cannot enter into the secret teachings. And that's what it says in Luke. And so at the time, in the time of Jesus, which would probably be, time of Herod, 10 to 15 AD, it's a time of change from a spiritual-based religion to a more dogmatic-based religion.
I see.
Yeah. Is that me? I hope it's not showing on you, is it?
No,
okay.
it's not.
Okay.
No,
No, it's wondering if somebody sent me a message. Sorry. And so this is, and it actually says that in the Bible. And this is all to do with the book of Revelation as interpreted by Edgar Cayce, the most famous American psychic. And I realized that tarot was actually talking, you can connect tarot to the book of Revelation. 14 of the cards in the major arcana fit exactly in the same order in the book of Revelation. And so that's more than coincidence. So that's where I started my occult private researches with the book of Revelation.
Is this generally known, the connection between the book of Revelation and the tarot?
No, not really. Unless you buy my book. This is, I think it's a unique, interpretation.
Very interesting.
So I like to write a book that's original. I don't like to rehash other people's ideas. If I don't have a really strong idea and I research it right down to the toenails, and if I don't believe it is original, I won't write it.
Excellent way to write a book. Many people, including myself, have often asked the question, what in the hell is this doing at the end of the Bible? I mean, it's like so different, so outrageous.
Not really, because if you, and it's given in here, but you can compare the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. Book of Revelation actually completes the Bible. So in the book of Revelation, the Garden to Eden, the gates were opened. In the book of Revelation, the gate is closed. You know, and all these references. So it actually completes the Bible, and I think that's an important. Yeah, it's a very surprising story, and it's again to do with dragons and things like that. But Edgar Cayce is much more of a psychological interpretation. So the dragon is, the whole story is about our impulses. And the letters, it starts off with 7 letters to the 7 churches. Those are our chakras. And each chakra has a strength and a weakness, and he talks about it in the book of Revelation. But you don't read it like that because it's written as a code. And that's one of the things I noticed is in Freemasonry, it's the same. We use codes, and most Masons don't notice that. They've never recognized it.
Wasn't Newton one of the people who first came up with the idea that the Bible itself is encoded?
Many people thought that, yes. It was, so he was looking for ways to decode it, yes. And he was also interested in, for example, in the actual dimensions of King Solomon's temple. And he thought that was a code for mankind, you know, what will happen to mankind in the future. So
to get back to tarot, you first encountered tarot when, how?
This is probably my first occult what was it? Introduction to the occult. Since about 1992, I've been suffering from really quite strong asthma. And I was hospitalized for 3 months with an advanced form of asthma, but I got over that. And when I came out of hospital, I was introduced to a psychic. He's a tarot reader. He comes to Tokyo twice a year. His name's Manfred. Have you heard of him?
No, I don't know.
Manfred Walzer. He is phenomenal. Absolutely. I was just bowled over. I couldn't speak after he gave me a reading. I kept saying to him, how do you know this stuff about my mother and my father, you know? And he said, it's just looking at the cards. I said, no, don't give me that. Somebody must have told you, because he was telling me things that only I knew. And I was so impressed. So I started studying the tarot, and in America and UK, we actually have tarot master qualifications. I took both American and UK qualifications as a tarot master. And then I decided to make my own tarot cards. And so I wrote the book first, and somewhere here, these are my tarot cards.
You have your own tarot cards, the Tarot of the Revelation.
Exactly.
How amazing is that? Based on your understanding of the book of Revelation, presumably.
Yeah, well, no, it's the images that most tarot cards, these are the original images that are actually described in the Bible. And they're slightly different from normal tarot cards, because normal tarot cards just copying somebody else. So there are only two streams of tarot cards. It's either Rider-Waite or the Marseille, the two systems, yes? Mine follows the Marseille system. But somebody had to design that in the first place. And again, I show in my book, and I can easily find because it's right at the back, but the death of Jesus is given in tarot cards, and also in, having said that, easy to find, I say. There, where is it? It should be right at the back. Here we are. I don't know if you can see that. So
I see, yes.
So it starts off with the symbol for the normal playing cards, which are represented by tarot cards.
I see.
And so, like a wand, no, put it the other way, a cup. The cup is the heart, yes? And so the cup is the tarot card, and the normal playing card is the heart. The cup is the cup they used at the last what do they call, not last judgment.
Last Supper.
Last Supper, yes, that's right. Yes, my translation's not working so well. Became the Holy Grail, yes, and then what is it? Trump, which is that in Trump in Japanese, but we call it spade. The spade is the sword. So you've got the sword and the cup. And the sword is the sword of David that executed John the Baptist. So in the story, you have the counterposition of Jesus and John. One is the Gnostic teachings of John, and then you've got the religious teachings of love thy neighbor, etc., of Jesus. And they join together, and the ultimate symbol is that.
I see. Oh, very.
Because this is just here, that is the alchemical symbol for the cup, for the water, and for the fire, water and fire. And we use the same symbol in the lodge in Freemasonry, but nobody knows that. They just don't see it. They don't know it has alchemical meanings. So the alchemy goes back so far in probably 2,000 years. This binding religion with alchemy and Freemasonry with alchemy, and so many things, either real alchemy, well, it's not hard to say real alchemy, but alchemy of making gold, or spiritual alchemy.
Well, this brings us to a very interesting thing to consider, which is that, you know, Netflix now has a documentary about Freemasonry, and it takes you through the journey of a young man who, from his initiation, they actually let you into the lodge probably for the first time. It's been filmed, and you get the impression, for somebody who knows nothing about Freemasonry, you get the impression that there is no way this is some kind of a evil trying to control the planet from behind a ridiculous conspiracy. obviously the guys who are up there and talking are straight up and down British guys who just want to lead a better life. I mean, that's all. There's nothing arcane or mysterious anywhere in any frame.
Right.
And of course, the detractors will say, oh, but they're hiding all of that. Well, I think that's the massive weakness of all conspiracy theory, is that they don't have any real basis in knowledge or information to back up these claims.
Right.
And, you know, I've often defended Freemasonry in lectures in Japanese as something that is a noble pursuit and has been around a long time. And you've just described that. However, the average lodge is it talking about issues as arcane as we've just discussed, the tarot, the spiritual nature, the Gnostic side of it, and the faith-based side of it, the two parts. I mean, are they discussing things like this in lodges in Tokyo these days?
We try to, yes. But again, it depends on the master of the lodge. So lodges change according to their membership. Like when I joined a Japanese lodge, so I'm a member of several lodges, and I joined a Japanese Sinim lodge, which used to be in Shanghai, but then during the war it had to move out of Shanghai and it came to Tokyo. And when I joined, it was full of cooks. People owned restaurants, mainly French cooks and a German cook. Do you know André Leconte, the coffee shops? No, there's Leconte coffee shops. There are about 5 or 6 in Tokyo. So he started those. And so because they're all cooks, all they thought about was food and going to restaurants, etc. But then it changes, and then new people come in and they're all, I don't know, university lecturers, and then the atmosphere changes. So lodges changing all the time. And conspiracy theory, my feeling is basically that it's people who are not allowed into lodges always think the worst about it.
Of course.
So when you join a lodge, you have to give references and you're interviewed, and we want people who will join a lodge without upsetting the harmony in the lodge. So you don't want people who are going to be, let's see, argumentative or cause problems, or they're, I don't know, they have really strange political leanings or something like that. We don't bring religion and politics into a lodge, and so anything else is fine to talk about. But we try and keep the harmony of the lodge by making sure good people get in.
Well, actually, if you think about how Japanese society is structured, if you want to become an apprentice for anything that's worth doing, it's probably even more difficult to get in and to stay in and go through the rigorous training to become even something like a carpenter for Japanese temples. And so it's a normal practice to keep the riff-raff out if you want your system of knowledge transferal to remain over time. You have to have rules. And perhaps this is an interesting point to bring up the idea of hierarchies, which are in the modern liberal Western educational milieu looked down upon as some male dominance system. But actually, hierarchies are completely a natural part of the biological world. There are hierarchies everywhere. And they're not based on a bunch of secretive, oppressive, rich people shoving everybody down. But that has become a mainstream perception. Has that given you any problems as a Freemason?
No, not really. People give me strange looks sometimes. So, you see, in England particularly, and many places in Europe, I think France and Germany, we don't say that we're Freemasons. We don't wear Masonic badges in our lapels. But you go to America or the Philippines, and they got lots of badges. They got bumper stickers. I'm a Mason. I'm proud to be a Mason, etc. They let it hang out. We don't do that in Europe. We say it's a private organizations. Our what we do in the organizations, our business, and that's it. We don't. If you want to join, then please join. Please apply through the proper channels, and we'll consider your application. But we're not And that's one of the reasons people don't have misunderstood Masonry, because we've never tried to promote it. We've never tried to do any PR until the last about 10 years, 5 years. Grand Lodge is very open now.
Yeah, I've noticed this, and I think it's because of so much proliferation of conspiracy theories. In a sense, you had to come out and open the doors before this got to an even more ridiculous level of conspiratorial nonsense about the Masons. And perhaps that's why the Netflix documentary came out. And I thought it was actually very well done, what I saw. It was very straight and very honest, and it showed you what people are doing. But there is nothing, again, in any of that that suggests the depths of spiritual alchemy that you're involved in. So how, I mean, what percentage of Masons has even the slightest inkling of the thousands of books that are surrounding you?
A moment.
He's going to find another book.
Well, no, this is the classic.
Oh, great.
Yes, it's classic. You either got to be a Christian or you join Freemasonry. That is the classic, you know. And the person here, he dropped out of Freemasonry because he felt that it was anti-Christ and all the rest of it. But he totally misunderstands the situation. So in my book, and I think this is a newer. Oh, you don't have this one. This is the one that just came out in January. It's the Quest for Immortality. And in it, I talk about the 4 eras of Freemasonry. So Freemasonry has evolved as we go. So until about 1716, from 1100s, it was to do with cutting stones and apprenticeships. And they had rules and things that they had to follow, etc. And basically, it was a manual workers organization. And then from 1716 to about the time of Victoria is the period I'm talking about, which is the early days of Freemasonry and what their objectives were. What we know as Freemasonry now is from Victorian age onwards. And so Victoria, the Victorians were very strict about morality. They're very somber, you know, they were a little bit strict, a little bit uptight about things. And particularly after Prince Albert died, most of the court and a lot of people in the government wore black to be, to commiserate with the Queen Victoria. And she was a very popular queen. And she wore black for the rest of her life. So Freemasons seem to have adopted this black clothes and dark, and also the morals and the moral teachings. Before that, we didn't have that. And the reason I know it is because many exposés were written in the early 1700s, say 1720, 1730, 38, around that time, giving the secrets of Freemasonry. But they're totally different from what we know Freemasonry is now. And when you compare the two, then you realize what was happening in the 1700s was different from what we know Freemasonry is now. So what we're now in is moralistic teaching, making good men better. What do we say? Yeah, it's the teaching of morality, basically. But before that, in the era I'm talking about, what we call the revival of Freemasonry, I believe it was a spiritual quest for immortality. And the reason I say that is because at that time in England, there were several people, including John Milton, who said that the soul does not exist. And there was a complete argument in London, the whole of England, but also probably in Europe as well, about what happens to the soul when you die. And there were like 5 or 6 different scenarios, and the Roman Catholics who were thrown out of England, there were only very few Catholics, only the very rich people like the Duke of Norfolk. He was allowed to live because he was a duke, but most Catholics were expelled from the country if they weren't killed or executed or whatever, like Jesuits. And so the Catholics said, well, when you die, you go to purgatory. And then what happens then is up to God. And, you know, and if your family are willing to make a donation to the church, well, we'll help him out of purgatory and things like that, you know, the usual money-making ideas. Other people said the soul, when the body dies, the soul dies. That's it. You're finished. Yes. Other people said, well, it's conditional on the quality of the life you have. And they were called conditionalists. And so if you spent a very pious life, you gave your money away as alms, and you helped the poor and indigenous, then you would live your soul would be assured a second life. There were like 5 or 6 scenarios like this, and it got so bad that even in the Houses of Parliament, they were debating these issues. And many authors who wrote books were imprisoned or whipped or fined for saying that the soul does not exist after death. And so Freemasonry at the time only had 2 degrees. And the third degree came in about 1725. And that is all about immortality. Man being resurrected to a better person, what we call the perfect Freemason. Well, my opinion is that the first 3 Grand Masters were trying to recreate an alchemical process. So in the first degree, which I call, this book's about the second degree. The first degree comes out at the end of March. The first degree, the spiritual fire is awoken in the person, and then it is changed in the second degree, and rather like the chi, the power force flowing through the body. That's what the second degree is about, and the third degree is about the last step of making the person immortal. So the whole process is actually about immortality. It's a process showing people how you can become immortal in your lifetime. Like I think it's the Gospel of St. Thomas. He talks about becoming immortal in your lifetime. And they were very pious people in these times. You know, they all knew their Bibles backward. As I say, you know, people, they spoke Latin and Greek. They talked about the Bible at breakfast, you know. This is their life, you know. There were so few books, there was not much entertainment, you know. Going to church was the law. You had to go to church every week, or the fine was the equivalent of £20 sterling. And it got to a point the fine rose to over £100. You know, that's a lot of money for not going to church. Yes? So
this is an appropriate time to discuss the times we live in, because for thousands of years we had religion to guide us morally, something that many modern people discount as totally unnecessary, primitive, superstitious, but it most certainly served an important function, which was a moral function. Certain things you just don't do.
But I'm sorry, jump in, but you see, one person's morals doesn't apply to another person. So, for example, the moral "you shall not kill." Well, what happens when you go to war? Is that suddenly suspended? You know,
exactly.
You know. So shouldn't we all soldiers be then? What's the word? Excommunicated? Thrown out of church, you know, because they kill. That's their job. Yes. So these have a. But personally, I believe all religion is based on magic, and at the center of even Catholicism and Protestantism, you can see the magic there if you know what you're looking for. It's a magical process that they are recreating inside the church, but they've lost the spirit. They lost the meaning behind what they're doing, you know, with the thurible and the censer, whatever they did, with all the, you know, why they put incense around the room? You know, why? To create the smoke, because then you can see ghosts and spirits in the room.
Ah, I see.
The only way, you know, if you've got some sort of spirits coming into the room, the only way you're going to see it if you smoke the whole place out.
Well, I completely agree with the concept of religion degenerating into a system of very shaky morality, where you can be ordered to murder another man for the sake of the stake, which is upheld by the religion. I mean, that's obviously one of the principal reasons, including priests who prey on young children, that the religions have gone, especially in the West,
Yes.
out
Right.
of fashion. And you can easily see why a replacement was needed for that. And I see Freemasonry as a very fine replacement in terms of being able to guide somebody morally, not dictate morals to them, but to guide them through a careful process of moral education, which includes helping others. And there's no doubt that the Masonic fraternities have helped many, many people in dire straits.
Yes.
So you know, we can't forget about that. But we're looking at the modern world now. The modern world seems to have gone off course in terms of any moral guidelines. It's very much the me generation, and perhaps that signals a time for what you're doing to become more significant. Do you see that?
One thing I really like about Freemasonry is that it is a passport to the world, because we do the same thing in every lodge everywhere in the world. And if you are a master of one lodge, you can visit Hong Kong, knock on the door and say, I'm a master. They'll let you in. You've suddenly got friends. You've got people you can trust, because we all have the same standards. You know, you mentioned previously, you know, that you want to keep the degenerates out. Well, we've already done that. They're filtered. You know, the people you meet are going to be good people. And if you need help, they will help you. So it's a fantastic organization. And for me, it's just, for example, in my book, I mentioned I went to, that's the Japanese book. I was sent to Edinburgh for 3 months on training, and I'd never been to Edinburgh. I didn't know anybody, but I knocked on a door of a lodge and went in, and they invited me to a lodge meeting. And because I'd come from Japan, I stood up and said a few words about Masonry in Japan and what we do. And for the rest of the 3 months, people kept on waving at me in the streets, because they recognized the one person. I didn't recognize, there were like 200 people at the banquet. Yes? They recognized me because I stood up and said, I'm from Japan, you know, but they would say, oh, hi, you know, like that. And you got time for a pint? And, you know, so I felt really at home in Edinburgh. I really loved it.
That's an amazing statement. That really is quite amazing that you can have that anywhere in the world. And surely now that you're a 33-degree Freemason, and tell us, do you know the statistics? How many of the Masons attain that degree?
Not many. So from our own experience in Tokyo, we probably have more than most, but we probably have about 10 or 12. We call them 33rd Masons, not 33, 33rd degree. So we have 10 or 12 at the moment. Some others have already gone home to America, where they came from. And we have about 2,000 Masons in Japan. So
only 2,000 in Japan. Yeah. I'm quite surprised. That's for this population. That's
right. So normally a 33rd degree Mason is probably 1 in 100 or a bit less, something like that.
And so, as a 33rd degree Mason now, are you called upon to go and lecture in other countries, for example, or appear?
I haven't been, but Taiwan, the Grand Master of Taiwan, asked me to come over because my next book is about Taoism and Freemasonry. And most people in Taiwan are Taoists. They left after the revolution, or it's actually the fall of the Ming dynasty in 1644. You had a northern Ming and a southern Ming. Southern Ming is based on Shanghai, which is quite close to Taiwan. At the time, they called it Formosa. And so many who were being attacked by the Qing, the Mongols, Manchurians coming from the north, they attacked all their own people. Yes? Manchurians, Chinese attacking the Ming Chinese in the south, and so the Ming all escaped to Taiwan, and that's where Taiwan comes from.
I see.
Before that, it was basically uninhabited, only pirates.
Is that right? So right now, what's your position within the Tokyo Lodge?
So one thing people misunderstand about these titles like 33rd degree Freemasonry is it's actually a separate organization to Freemasonry. It's called the Scottish Rite. Yes, so a rite is a ritual. So we have a Freemasonry rite which is only 3 degrees: first, second, and third. Entered, apprenticed, fellow craft, and master mason. Only 3 degrees. Even the Grand Master is only a 3rd degree master, up to the 3rd degree. You don't have to be a 33rd degree master mason to become Grand Master. It doesn't work like that.
Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Right. So on the Grand Lodge's page, it says there are only 3 degrees in Freemasonry and the Royal Arch. Now, the Royal Arch is another ritual. So at one time, until 1813, we had 2 Grand Lodges in England. We had the Ancients and the Moderns. And the Ancients were more like operative Masons. And the Moderns made this new ritual based on immortality with Desaguliers and alchemy. And they all put it in, they made it into a cipher, into the ritual. That's why nobody knows this, you see. I deciphered the ritual, and then I found this, and that's how I found the whole story to write the book.
I see.
Based on what I'd studied in the book of Revelation, which is also a ritual. It's also a cipher. And Edgar Casey deciphered this cipher, and I learned how he did it. So when it came to Masonry, I did the same thing, and that's how I found it.
Oh, that's incredible. Well done.
So Freemasonry is based on 3 degrees, and sometimes we also have the Royal Arch. Besides that, there are 2 big organizations, Scottish Rite and York Rite. And these are the 2 other big organizations. You don't have to join them. You just be a 3rd degree Mason and you can enjoy all the benefits everybody gets. It's all the same. It's just a further, we sometimes call Scottish Rite the University of Freemasonry, because we learn more about chivalry and other cryptic kind of thing, cryptic teachings. Yes. And then the York Rite is more of a spiritual kind of Christian-based education. But it's just the same Freemasonry, but in a greater depth.
I see. So in that sense, you then belong to or are connected with all of them?
Yeah, all 3. I belong to 3 organizations, yes.
I see. Is that relatively rare to belong to all 3? No. It's pretty much
particularly in Japan, because we have the Grand Lodge, the Blue Lodges, which is, so you have the Grand Lodge at the top, and underneath you have all the sister lodges or daughter lodges, and we're in the same building. So we meet the Grand Master on a regular basis. Scottish Rite is in the same building, so we don't have to go anywhere. But if you go to San Francisco, for example, you'd be in a lodge, you'd never meet the Grand Master of Grand Lodge of California, yeah, which is another place. And the Scottish Rite is in Oakland, which is, 15, 20 miles away. So it's all over the place. But for us, it's all in one place. So therefore, it's very easy for us to join all 3 organizations.
Well, this has been very educational, especially that last part. I really didn't have any information on that. In your epilogue to this really well-researched book, you say, nowadays, Freemasonry is understood to be a syncretic charity, promoting the universality of brotherhood and making good men better. But it was not always so. Freemasonry at its core is a quest for immortality.
Yes.
And that particular topic is really what is involving all of your energies now, I would imagine.
Yes. So I'm going on to the 4th book, which is so there are these 2 books for the second and the 3rd degree. I wrote the 1st degree to come out later for certain political reasons. But those 3 books, the 4th book is about Royal Arch, and that brings in the whole teaching about how to experience immortality in our lifetimes, based on religion, the Trinitarianism. For example, like Trinitarianism, the belief of the Trinity was fundamental to Christians in the 17th century and 18th century, that it's in the law. If you said you didn't believe in it, you could either be whipped or even executed. They executed people for not believing in Christian dogma, you know. But actually, Trinitarianism is fundamental to this Chinese idea of the three bodies inside the body. It's just the way the Christians have taught it has been so wrong over the years that everyone's got so confused about what Trinitarian really is. If you look it up on the internet, just the other day I was listening to a podcast, I think it's called In Our Time, with Melvin Bragg on the BBC Channel 4. It's about Trinitarianism. And they have 3 professors there talking about it, and none of them can come to a conclusion what it really is. You know? And if 3 professors of English universities talking about Trinitarianism cannot tell us what it really is, well, that's the problem, yes?
That's the problem.
Yeah,
Well,
because it's so simple what it really is, but they piled all this dogma on the top. Now it's got so confused, you know. So people say, well, one of the challenges is about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. Is one superior to the other? No, they're all the same. Do they work in unison? You know, if God goes and smites some Israelites, does that mean God the Son was there too, and God the Holy Ghost was there too? You know, I mean, how far does this go? You know, so why have 3? Why just have the one and forget about the other? You know, so. It gets confusing.
It's actually a very profound idea that's been around a long time. So I'm very happy to hear that somebody has some insights about it that can be shared. And you obviously are sharing them. You're writing in Japanese and in English.
Yeah.
Have you had any feedback so far from the Japanese community or the English-speaking community? These are
the Japanese Masons love my first book. They were this one here, the Shinjitsu no Rekishi. They were really happy because it's all about the things that they want to say but they can't say.
I see.
And then these 2, the new books that recently come out, they are being translated at the present time and will come out in December this year as a single volume. We don't know the title yet, but it's for the Japanese brethren. So the books are actually written for Masons. They're not written for Mr. Joe Public. So I don't explain all the what this means and what's the first degree and which is kind of private, but a Mason reading it would know. So that is one thing. It's not a negative, but this is specialist book teaching Freemasons that the ritual we have now is actually, it's a puzzle, it's a cipher. You know, Churchill said it was a puzzle inside an enigma, inside a whatever. You know, that's what it is. You have to peel down, and then you realize this is what they're talking about. And when you see it, it's so obvious.
Yeah, well, that's why you don't cast pearl to swine. It's a very profound statement.
Exactly.
Why should people be easily accessible to this information, which has taken so long and so much hard work? And you're surrounded by the books that you have had to study to get this information. That takes time and energy and passion and commitment, which are not in high supply with the short attention spans of most modern people. So how do you see, in closing, the future of Freemasonry? I mean, are people going to be up to the task, modern people, or not? What do you think?
Japanese people like to join things. They like to be part of something. I believe I do also work as a suicide prevention counselor, and I find there's a lot of loneliness in Japan. Doesn't matter about the age. Somebody's in 60s, 30s, they get lonely, and even a big city with so many people. And so loneliness drives people sometimes to find organizations to join. And so we are growing very slowly. Other areas in the West, Freemasonry is in decline. So I put in, I think it's the data's in the book. Oh, it's in the next book. Place like Pennsylvania, it lost nearly 100,000 people in 1 year.
Wow.
Well, the whole country starting off with 5 million Masons, so, but it's declining so fast there. because people are working 2 jobs, you know, and they don't have time to be part of their community, to get involved. Whereas in the Far East, like Hong Kong, is a growth, the Philippines, Singapore, Japan, we're growing. So,
So
yeah,
people like you are going to be very actually important, because you've got a handle on both the West and the East. You speak the languages of both. So it would seem to me that you've got your work cut out from now.
Well, I want to put the spirituality back into Freemasonry. It has a spiritual element there that people have kind of cut out or thrown away, and they kept all the ritual and all the dry stuff, all the moral teachings, you know. It says in this book that I wrote that we're not making people moral. We should have moral people joining us. Why would we get degenerates join us and teach them how to be moral? No, they were chosen because they were moral people in the first place. Yes. So what are we teaching them? That's the question. And the question is, we're teaching them how to experience immortality in their lifetime. And but we also have lost the thread. We've lost how to do that. You know, just like the church has lost its spirituality, we lost our spirituality.
It's a global epidemic of loss of meaning, and so.
And it's one of the things I say about about suicide is, I believe religion is extremely important to everybody because it gives meaning to people's lives. And even if the dogma is different and we don't agree on everything, but if you don't have something to believe in, you know, sometimes when life's hard and things are going against you, you don't feel you have any support. You know, God's not there with you because you're by yourself, and particularly if you're lonely, and that's why people kill themselves. But people who are religious and go to church, they don't kill themselves.
This is true. A very important point.
Yeah.
And one I would like to suggest we end on, because I think there's a lot more for us to discuss here than the time that we've been allotted, which is already over an hour. So I thank you very much, Chris, for a really enlightening discussion. I'll get this information to you as a video file on YouTube, and then you can go ahead and start the subtitling. You get it back to me, and I will do the
It'll take quite a while.
Well, it will take a while, but you know, it will be worth it. Yeah. Hopefully it will be shared by people, first of all, in the community of Masons who would understand it, but also a lot of the poor people outside of the society who really have the most absurd notions about Freemasonry, the most ridiculous notions that are not only dangerous, they're just plain stupid. And this has to be addressed properly, and I think you're doing it. So thank you very much, Chris.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Look forward to another interview at another time, and maybe even in person. That would be great.
When will you be in Tokyo next?
Oh, I'm not sure, but I'd love to be in that library. I'd probably get sucked in there for
It's not libraries. It's just a study.
Oh, anyway. Well, I mean, that's a pretty serious study. So I look forward to that possibility, Chris. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Take care. God bless.
Bye. Thank you.